Hello again, everyone. This is Louis Setti speaking as the Blue Ridge Reporter on Wednesday, March 14th, 2012, about a very interesting story that provides an unusual published perspective about the war in Iraq. The story is in the Liberty Champion, a publication of Liberty University, published March 6, 2012, and it's about a Liberty University student who had been in Iraq, dispatched with the American National Guard, and his experience there, as the newspaper reported, until the war in December ended. So this young man, whose name I won't mention, was in Iraq right up until the time when the war ended. Now, the first thing we should get in perspective here is this man saw the situation as the war ended, in presumably what was the best condition that the American effort could leave that country. This was as good as it could get, presumably, because the war ended and troops were being returned home. Mission basically accomplished, or so they say. By the way, when wars end, usually there's some kind of fanfare for a military victory. There wasn't any such thing other than in a formalistic way regarding the so-called end of the war in Iraq, though we still have troops there. This young man was a radio and telephone operator. His assignment was to assist with radio transmissions regarding the removal of improvised explosive devices that may be along roadways. And the young man said, and I'll quote, "I didn't think there was anything else we could do over there. The people still need a lot of help, though. They're still blowing each other up, and 90% of the munitions coming into the country, both to blow us up and Iraqi citizens, were coming from Iran." And that's a close quote. Then the article goes on to summarize this gentleman's observations by saying that most Iraqi roads require clearance. Even at this time, at the end of the war, most Iraqi roads still require clearance of improvised explosive devices. But one notorious highway had to be cleared every time a convoy motored down that highway. It simply was not safe after all this time. And that road extended all the way to the border of Iraq with Iran. So after all this time, the situation is far from being secure. And these are very telling comments because they come from a young man who is not a high-ranking military commander. He's not an official military spokesman. These are his personal observations from being there. He also said that the U.S. Army left supplies that were very expensive in Iraq because it was too expensive to bring them home. And they were just thrown away and put in dumpsters. And the young man said, quote, "They threw away a lot of stuff. And by a lot of stuff, I mean a lot of taxpayer dollars," close quote. This is what the young man saw. This may not be reported on the news by a high-ranking military spokesman. He said this was expensive equipment thrown into dumpsters, but they were not allowed to go into the dumpsters and retrieve the equipment. That equipment had to be left behind. He said when he left Iraq, he was flown out of the country on a Black Hawk helicopter, and ironically, he passed over the bombed-out Iraqi tanks left over from the first Gulf War. The first Gulf War, like the second Gulf War, was yet another undeclared war, and therefore an unconstitutional and illegal war, nevertheless endorsed by conservatives who so proudly spoke of the conservative, neoconservative, globalist Republicans who were responsible for putting both of those wars into place. The young man said, quote, "I guess I was probably 3 or 4 during the first Gulf War, so for me to be able to fly over that area and look at the end of a second war over there, it was really cool." All right, a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of death, and the making of enemies to an extent and type we never had before were the result of those 2 wars, and that's not really cool. Don't forget that first Iraqi war was nothing more than to protect the Saudi family from an invasion by Iraq, Saddam Hussein, so the Saudis could continue providing oil for us. That was a deal President Nixon made in the 1970s. We would provide military cover for the Saudi regime, and it would continue to supply us with oil. So these are the consequences of undeclared wars, really about oil, when in fact all kinds of euphemisms are used about helping the Iraqi people, helping the people in Afghanistan, liberating them, etc., etc. And this is a particularly telling eyewitness report from a young man who was saying perhaps more than he knew. This is Lou Rossetti speaking as the Blue Ridge Reporter.